Good afternoon and welcome to Denver's 2022 Building and Fire Code Adoption Briefing. My name is Eric Browning. I'm the Chief Building Official in Community Planning and Development, and I'll be one of your co-hosts presenting information this afternoon. Today, we'll be talking about the adoption process. And before we get into some of the specifics and the agenda, I'd like to touch on some of the rules of the road for participating this afternoon. As is the case with most of our presentations, everyone is welcome. Just please be respectful when using the chat, or if you have questions. We will be using breakout rooms. We'll explain how to go about using those just a little bit later in the presentation. And we have team members that are available to identify participants so that they can ask their questions and comment real time. If you do have questions, we ask that you go ahead and type them in the chat box. You can see from the image on the screen that there is a chat function probably near the bottom of your screen. And if we get to the point where you have a question in a breakout room, you can use the raise hand function, which is under the reactions icon, also likely at the bottom of your screen. If by chance you happen to call in on your phone, then you can use the *6 button to unmute when it's time for questions or comments in the breakout rooms. If you don't mind, please keep questions brief so that we can answer as many as possible. We'll try to put a little bit of a limit on that if necessary. And then again, please do be respectful. We have a very robust presentation prepared. We've looked to provide ample opportunity to answer questions, both specific to particular codes, as well as any general questions that folks might have as well. So with that, let's talk about the agenda. And so welcome again, everyone. In the next few slides, I'll turn it over for the Energize Denver update from our partners in the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, also known as CASR. We'll then provide an overview of proposed code changes. We'll take 30 minutes in two 15-minute sessions to go into breakout rooms. And then we'll talk about next steps in the code adoption process, as well as a general open Q&A session after we come back from our breakout rooms. So let me talk about the breakout rooms for just a moment. And they will be specific to the International Building Code and existing building code. There will be one for the fire code. There'll be one for the residential code. We've combined mechanical, plumbing, fuel gas, energy code, and Denver Green Code in one breakout room. And then there will be the main lobby, which is where everyone is now. And it is not a breakout room, so you don't have to select a separate room. And if there's general questions not related to any of the specific codes that we just talked about, breakout rooms 1, 2, 3, or 4, you'll be welcome to stay in the main lobby. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Robert Peak, who is the Director of Development Systems Performance. With that, Robert, you have the floor.
All right, thanks, Eric. Yeah, so before we get into Energize Denver requirements and the other code updates, I just wanted to provide an overview on where things stand across development services. So again, I'm our Director of Development System Performance, and I work with all the agencies that touch our development process. There are roughly 52 different functions that could touch a development review. And so my team works to find enhancements and innovations across our entire system, but we thought it would be beneficial just to provide a kind of lay of the land for you all. So this first slide talks through the volume that we've experienced over the last couple of years. So despite some of the COVID and some of the other challenges we've seen there, Denver has continued to grow, and the construction in the city hasn't slowed down. So as you can see on the chart, we've continued to sustain a high volume of permit applications. So this is year-to-date new log volume. So whenever a new permit is submitted, a new permit application is submitted, we create what's called the log record. As you can see, we've continued to experience a high volume there. While at the same time, we've had some staffing shortages and some turnover and other recruitment challenges. So this has created some challenges and created some backlogs within our system that we're working to address. So we've implemented a whole set of initiatives to minimize some of our backlogs and plan review times. The first was just aggressive filling of open positions. We've had a number of vacancies across development services and community planning development alone. I think at the low point, it was up to like 25 or 30% vacancy rate, and is now down to approximately 10%, which is great, which means we're filling these positions, getting folks trained, and largely because of that, we should start to see a reduction in plan review times. We've also implemented some other initiatives just outside of just hiring people. As you guys know, it could take some time to get folks hired, onboarded, and then trained up. So we've tried to fill the gap through additional overtime to plan reviewers, and really most of our groups. So that includes our commercial zoning group, building inspectors, our residential plan review, and many of our commercial plan review groups as well. Additionally, we've hired a third-party consultant to help perform residential building plan reviews. So those of you who are involved in residential construction should start to see reviews conducted by Bureau Veritas, which is the third-party consultant we've brought on, and they've already started to have an immediate impact on our residential plan review backlog and review times. And then there are a whole set of process innovations that we're working on that are fairly within our control. So we've updated how we're assigning projects out. So we're updating, so we're assigning projects out closer to the date that we can actually get it done. And that has created a bunch of efficiencies. That way, in case a reviewer goes out unexpectedly or is on vacation, it's not just sitting there, and we can effectively level load and manage that workload. We're implementing a minor resubmittal process that can be triggered based on the plan reviewer's comments. So if they indicate that the resubmittal could be done in a minor fashion, it's just a short review, they can indicate that on the review, and that moves you a little further up in the queue. And we're also trying to be transparent just with what our plan review times are. So we have a dashboard that's updated daily, posted to our website, that displays our average plan review times. So we can at least tell you where we're at, where you might be in the queue, and you can plan accordingly. I think we're only one of a few jurisdictions that is actually doing this, at least from the research that I've done. We're returning to more in-person meetings. So those who are part of the entitlement process, going through concept and formal site development plan, we're starting to hold more in-person concept meetings again, and are intentionally setting those up and giving you that option to attend in person or virtually. And we've opened up more customer service lines as well, so you can effectively get triaged to the appropriate team. And our customer service desk is now open Monday through Friday. Got one more slide here, I think. So what are our goals? We wanted to significantly reduce the city's building permit application review backlog by the end of Q1 2023. So different teams are at different levels of backlog, but we'd like to drastically improve much of this by the end of Q1, and are on pace to do just that. Through all these innovations that I spoke of, and through some other initiatives, I believe we're on course to do that. So working to provide improved customer service through some of the examples that I already shared, and working to effectively keep pace with our permit demand through effective staffing levels and bringing on additional help as needed. So that's what I have, and from there I'll turn it over to the folks in CASR to talk through Energize Denver. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, Robert. Can you all hear me okay? All right, I see nods. Hi, everyone. I'm Katrina Manigan. I'm the Director of Buildings and Homes for Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I am going to give you just a 5-minute overview of the Energize Denver ordinance, which covers existing commercial and multifamily buildings. And I'll tell you how to learn more because it's not the main focus for today's briefing, but we know there's interest in this audience. So if we go to the next slide, you can see Denver's goals. We know that buildings and homes are responsible for 64% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. And Denver has committed to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. And so for buildings and homes, our goals are that all new buildings and homes are net zero energy by 2030, and all existing buildings and homes are net zero energy by 2040. If you go to the next slide, we can see the Energize Denver requirements for existing commercial and multifamily buildings. There's 3 main pillars that are part of Energize Denver. The first is benchmarking. This has been in place since 2016. Buildings over 25,000 square feet have to submit their energy performance information every year. There are performance requirements, which our office implements, that regulate the site energy use intensity, or the KBTUs used per square foot, for buildings over 25,000 square feet to require those buildings to be more energy efficient. There's also prescriptive lighting upgrade requirements or solar requirements for buildings between 5,000 and 25,000 square feet. And then the third piece is the electrification requirements for all commercial and multifamily buildings to partially electrify space and water heating equipment upon system replacement when cost effective. You can learn more at denvergov.org/energizedenver. And just to walk through the electrification requirements in a little bit more detail, this chart shows the phasing for the Energize Denver requirements for the partial electrification of commercial and multifamily space and water heating equipment upon system replacement. This does not cover homes. In 2023, the permit processes will be changing to achieve parity between permitting gas systems and heat pump systems. Today, the like-for-like replacement of a gas system is much easier than permitting a heat pump. Quick permits will no longer be available for the majority of gas system replacements starting in March 1st of 2023. In 2025, heat pumps will be required upon replacement for equipment when cost effective, and the equipment covered in 2025 will be the furnaces, air conditioners, and water heaters. And then phasing into 2027, heat pumps will be required for at least partial electrification, again, when cost effective, for harder to electrify systems like boilers. I'll just cover briefly why we're talking about electrification of space and water heating equipment. I know this is still new for a number of folks. On the whole, the Energize Denver ordinance, all 3 pillars will reduce emissions from buildings 80% by 2040. And electrifying space and water heat helps reduce methane emissions, which is a really potent greenhouse gas. But also the fossil gas, or the methane or natural gas burned to heat our homes and buildings, are responsible for 20% of Denver's greenhouse gas emissions. And we know that zero emission electricity is coming. So the Colorado legislature has required electric utilities to decarbonize the electric grid 80% by 2030. And Xcel Energy, our local utility, has voluntarily exceeded that target. They've filed a plan to achieve 85% emission reductions by 2030. If we go to the next slide, we're also looking to improve equity and safety. We know that in 30 to 40% of low-income homes, gas equipment fails carbon monoxide tests. And energy efficiency measures are also going to reduce the energy burden and energy costs. I'll go on to the next slide. I'll just tell you briefly about all of the resources we're creating to support all of the existing buildings with compliance. We will have the Energized Denver Hub. You can see that same link here again, providing technical assistance, how-to guides, checklists, additional assistance for under-resourced buildings with all of these requirements. And I want to invite all of you on December 1st to join us either virtually or in person. Both options are available for the Energized Denver Summit, 3 hours in the morning to dive in on each pillar of the Energized Denver requirements and hear from your peers about how they're developing compliance strategies. The next slide talks about our incentives. We have kind of 3 incentives that we're developing. The first is for electrification feasibility reports. These will be one of the options required by code in 2023 for commercial and multifamily buildings replacing existing gas systems and tank type hot water heaters and air conditioners. And so, and furnaces. So we will have a lot of these rolling out and incentives for these starting in 2023. And we have pilot projects for electrifying existing buildings that have are already underway. So those applications are open, and based off of what we learned from the pilots, we will issue a full set of incentives and rebates for heat pump equipment designed to really increase the use of heat pumps at that time of system replacement. We go to the last slide. I'll just also touch on our incentives for new buildings and homes. We have design incentives. If for a new building or home, you are looking to build all electric and want financial support for doing that new design, we also have incentives and dollars to help pay for all electric pilot projects. So those applications are open. I'll drop those in the chat. I will also be building a net zero energy new buildings hub with lots of information available to help support our community through the coming code changes for new buildings.
Thank you very much, Katrina. I'll now be talking about the code adoption process for the Denver Building and Fire Code, which includes all of the other trade codes that were previously mentioned, as well as the Denver Green Code, and a description for some high-level changes to these codes. Certainly, the changes that I will discuss momentarily will not include every single amendment. We do have our amendments posted in draft form on our website, and we'll make sure to provide the appropriate links to those for anyone who would like to review or comment on those between now and the time after Thanksgiving. Those are currently up. To step back for just a moment and talk about the background and the public engagement process for this code adoption cycle, it has been a robust and quite a long cycle for all of us involved. The hard work that has been put in by subject matter experts and interested parties throughout our community, as well as city staff, initiated over a year ago. And in May and June 2021, we held working group meetings, which is a new approach for our energy code and our green codes, in order to develop concepts and the basis for some of the formal code amendment changes that would come later in the process. July through December of 2021, there was a formal amendment drafting period. At the time, anyone could submit proposed code changes, both city staff and anyone else that was interested in submitting changes for consideration. And then January through July of this year, we held formal code hearings that were somewhat similar to the ICC national level hearings on 6 different committees. In total, we held, I believe, nearly 24 different formal code hearings across our 6 committees. And we made sure to include a wide array of participants. These are our volunteer committees, and we are very thankful for the many folks who took the time to be involved in this code amendment process. And as you can see, there are a number of them listed here on the screen. As far as the focus for this code adoption cycle in 2021 and 2022, there was a particular focus on energy and climate action. And as Katrina noted previously, as associated with Energize Denver work, we made sure to incorporate reasonable but robust advancements in the energy code, in green code as related to climate action, excuse me, and Denver's short and long range goals. And so in total, we heard over 60 formal energy code proposals. We worked on those at the committee level, at subcommittees, and in supplemental hearings, and made sure to consider not only the goals, as I noted, but also the time and cost impacts of those changes for a reasonable and equitable approach to code revisions. In the next part of the presentation, I'll be talking through some of the highest level or most impactful changes to the codes in building an existing building code, residential code, fire code, mechanical, plumbing, and fuel gas codes, energy code, and green code. So moving into some of the more impactful international building code and international existing building code amendments at the Denver specific level. We advanced, and by advance we mean we pulled forward into Denver's codes language that had already moved through the 2024 national level for mass timber. And it allows essentially more visibility, more exposure of mass timber compared to previous code cycles. It makes tall wood buildings more economically viable, but is also substantiated on safety because testing was done to bring these amendments into the national code and into Denver's amendments. And in line with Denver's climate goals, mass timber is one of the most sustainable materials available in terms of low embodied carbon, sequestered carbon, and generally you're going to have less construction waste during the process. The next item has to do with amending the international building code amendments to remove 3 less restrictive fire safety elements so that we could improve fire safety in alignment with the national codes. The current amendments had to do with allowance for what are called water curtain equivalencies in lieu of rated walls, 1-hour shafts in lieu of 2-hour shafts, and non-rated shaft supporting unrated or non-rated construction. And so we brought our code amendments in alignment with the national codes. We also addressed universal parking spaces for electrical vehicle charging. And this was a great conversation. And we believe that the amendments that are now proposed, which you can find online, again, we'll point to those shortly, will provide a combination of parking spaces for those that need accessible or universal spaces and for those that need electrical vehicle parking spaces. So that is a new amendment here in Denver, but will be providing access for multiple members of the community, whether looking for electrical vehicle charging or they're looking for accessibility. And there were changes in the classification for distilleries and alcohol storage facilities. with specific regard to H occupancies, which are very high hazard occupancies. And we addressed them with respect to the hazard of the material associated with that H occupancy. And that really has to do with the fire and life safety requirements and the provisions for the building and for the systems to protect the building and the occupants for those high hazard facilities. Finally, we provided clarification, in particular with respect to IRC buildings and how they relate to the IEBC and group R3 occupancies. So for clarity, if a project is currently under the IRC and it didn't have an occupancy classification because occupancy classifications only existed in the building code, it was very challenging to look to apply the IEBC criteria. And so item number 5 here is a very simple clarification, but it will make applying the IEBC much easier for these uses. Moving on into the International Residential Code changes, we made some significant shifts in the code language as applicable to low VOC materials. VOCs are volatile organic compounds, and that's going to go a long ways in improving indoor air quality and essentially the health and safety for occupants that are inhabiting these single family homes or 2-family homes or townhomes. In addition, we added and amended substantially Appendix AJ in the IRC for the alteration, addition, or change of occupancy or relocation of existing IRC buildings. Similar to the R3 occupancies and IEBC, it was very complicated and there were different code paths for renovations to existing IRC structures. And this new Appendix AJ provides a much clearer path and essentially a single source of information for making modifications to IRC buildings. In terms of items 3 and 4 here on the screen, we provided some clarity in terms of what is and is not a complete independent dwelling unit. And that's a defined term, and it is important that we differentiate what is and is not a complete independent dwelling unit for the purpose of fire and life safety provisions, in particular the rated separations that are necessary between units. In addition, we updated the IRC to align with zoning code amendments that were passed in 2021 with respect to the definition of group living. And so now we have alignment and consistency between the IRC and the zoning code. We added language regarding the regulation of accessory structures with living spaces to ensure fire and life safety provisions are met. So something that is not necessarily a dwelling unit. So it may not be an ADU associated with a primary residence, but it could be a building that's more than just a storage shed or a tool shed. It could be an artist studio. It could be a space that's used or conditioned more so than where someone might be storing their garden tools. And again, this is all in the vein of improving life safety and fire safety for these types of accessory structures associated with IRC buildings. And then finally, we added prescriptive code language that will allow for quicker, more efficient design specifications for things like sheds and greenhouses and other accessory structures that will ultimately save time and cost for those cases where structural engineering for maybe a foundation is not needed for this type of work. So we're recognizing the path to providing easy design, prescriptive design with these types of accessory structures. Moving on to the International Fire Code. This first slide identifies 5 of the primary changes that were made at the national level. So to be clear, these are not Denver amendments. I'll be talking about those on the next slide. But these 5 amendments come from the International Fire Code Committee at the national level. And in particular, in section 320, there are updates that account for hazards that are presented by what's called additive manufacturing, which most folks are going to recognize as 3D printing. And in some cases, the materials and the process associated with 3D printing can be quite hazardous to the occupants or the operators of a particular facility. There can be dust, metals, flammable gases, and other hazardous materials associated with more industrial level, production. And so that's what this criteria in section 320 of the IFC addresses. I'll note that this is not related to someone that might have a 3D printer at home on their desk. Those are not considered industrial level production. So it doesn't regulate what is essentially a non-hazard associated with 3D printing at home. In section 501, there are requirements for review and approval of site safety plans on construction sites. And that's intended to address many of the situations throughout the country, and we've seen some of them here locally as well, that our first responders have had to react to for during construction emergencies or fires, when something that is unprotected, either passively or actively, may catch on fire or have a different hazard associated with that. So the national codes address that in section 501. There is clarifying criteria in section 903 regarding both the sprinklering requirements for open garages. There's a 48,000 square foot threshold associated with that. And in 903, clarification regarding 13R, which are residential type sprinkler systems as defined by NFPA, and that they are only allowed for buildings less than 30 feet to the occupied level. And that's the key criteria there, the 30 foot to the occupied level. And that's where we're talking about fire department access. Finally, at the national level, Chapter 12 of the IFC was heavily modified to account for new power technologies. As we know, electrification is already making great strides and will continue to do so in the years to come. And there are certain hazards associated with electrification, whether that is associated with greater power sources. If we just have larger, panels or voltages coming into certain systems, or whether that's related to on-site battery storage or other elements that support electrification. On the next slide, I want to talk for a few minutes about Denver-specific fire code amendments. And these are ones that are obviously specific to our jurisdiction. And we'll start with some administrative requirements and clarifications in 105 that acknowledge and formalize phased occupancy in new buildings. And this is intended to create a more efficient pathway for owners or developers and contractors to occupy and generate revenue in buildings, while also at the same time ensuring for the safety of some of those initial occupants and for the crews, both our first responder crews and for the construction crews that are still on site for a phased occupancy or a partially finished building. In Chapter 5, there is an integration within the fire code of DOTI's Vision Zero design efforts. DOTI is our partner Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. and their Vision Zero is focused on reducing pedestrian and traffic accidents. And so fire department was a great partner in modifying their code language to work with achieving some of those Vision Zero design efforts. In section 510, RES is for radio enhancement systems. We've reconciled some very long time requirements with a national approach regarding UL listings and equipment. And it has to do with communication of emergency services within concrete and steel buildings. The fire department had a policy that was, I believe, over a decade old. And so it's been updated and is now in alignment with more modern processes and technology. In sections 903 and 907, elevator emergency functions, and specifically regarding alarm technicians no longer accessing hoistways for service language has been updated. There are specific training requirements and certifications associated with who can and cannot access elevator hoistways. And these amendments will make it safer for the technicians in these hoistways. In addition, section 915, again, we now reconcile some long-time requirements with the national approach regarding CO. And that was simply an update for Denver, getting up to speed with our national code language. And then finally, in 920, there are requirements for maps showing elevator power disconnects throughout the building that is intended to be scoped for the elevator contractor. This will support Denver fire crews when they are running an alarm, so that they know the quantity of elevators, if there are entrapments. It provides critical information to those incident commanders that allows for a more efficient response during rescue efforts. Okay, moving on to International Mechanical Plumbing and Fuel Code Denver amendments, a couple high-level items to point out here. In particular, mechanical ventilation requirements for R2, R3, and R4 occupancies, which you'll recognize as residential. Those amendments were added that will likely encourage the use of energy recovery units in dwelling units. It requires supply air to each unit, and it's really a more effective ventilation strategy than the exhaust only strategy that's prescribed in the IMC National Code. In addition, the reduced exhaust and intake separation distances, when we're talking about factory built combination exhausts in intake fittings, that will help encourage the use of energy recovery units within these occupancies and within the buildings. And then when we take a look at, if you could go back one slide, please. If we take a look at the plumbing fixture updates, we made some amendments regarding flow rates for fixtures to come into alignment in either meeting or exceeding. And by exceeding, we mean having a flow rate less than EPA's water sense requirements. And so when we think about advancing our climate goals, we recognize the importance of water. And that being said, water sense is one resource that we can use, and making sure that the fixtures are either better than or equivalent to water sense from water consumption will help us achieve those goals. Moving forward now into our energy code amendments. This is where, again, a significant amount of time was spent during our code adoption and our committee hearing process. On this slide, we'll see a list of seven items, and I'll describe some of them in detail. Before I get into some of the more detailed descriptions, I'll note that items 1 and 2 are for commercial partial electrification for space heating and for water heating. And those amendments are related to new construction in commercial and multifamily buildings. And these were included in the Energy Code amendments to align with Energize Denver. For those that don't know, Energize Denver ordinance language applies to existing construction. And it was critical that there was parity from the new construction and the existing building perspective when it comes to electrification for space and water heating. And so these items for partial electrification essentially bring those into alignment. Items 3 and 4 and 5, in addition to 6, really support electrification, the ease of use of electric infrastructure, and align with the city's comprehensive plan goals, comprehensive plan 2040 goals, as we look forward. And then finally, we made updates on our commercial EV electric vehicle requirements. We recognized in Denver that in 2019, quite frankly, we were a bit more aggressive than we needed to be and had set some goals that were very challenging to achieve and not as economically advantageous as we would have liked them to be. So what we've done regarding electric vehicles is we've backed off Denver specific requirements and brought them more into alignment with the national level criteria. So if I go back for just a second to items 1 through 6, I will speak to the partial electrification. Again, as I noted, this brings it into alignment with Energize Denver ordinance requirements. And essentially for the long term, and this isn't, again, this isn't immediate here in 2023, but does set the stage for longer term goals, but does look for electric to be used as the primary fuel source as opposed to fossil fuels such as gas. In item number 3, 4, and 5, we're talking about 3 different energy modeling pathways. The PEUI Appendix G energy modeling metric and Appendix G site energy metric are 3 unique ways that a building or part of a building can be modeled. And the idea is that we have advanced the language within our amendments to work towards Denver's climate goals, but we also wanted to ensure that we provided multiple pathways for compliance. To narrow it down to only 1 or maybe 2 pathways would have been too restrictive and would have almost painted projects into a certain box, so to speak, in terms of compliance. We wanted to maintain the availability for different approaches. I'm not going to get into the details of these pathways at this time. If you have specific questions, I'd invite you to jump into the IECC breakout room here in just a couple minutes. Finally, just regarding item 6, the commercial prescriptive pathway really incentivizes electrification, simplified the pathway through the code for all electric buildings, and it does provide quite a bit of flexibility for teams to select their own pathway in terms of achieving the number of credits if they are using that prescriptive path. Moving on in IECC, in particular regard to residential energy modeling, again, we've made amendments to bring the modeling pathway in alignment with Denver's goals, and it incentivizes electrification, or it incentivizes electric buildings, but it also makes it easier for calibrating the modeling pathway to Denver's goals in the future as well. There's a residential prescriptive pathway that is very similar to the commercial pathway that I described just a moment ago. It incentivizes electrification, and it provides flexibility for design teams to essentially choose their own adventure in terms of achieving the number of credits needed for code compliance on the prescriptive pathway. There's code language for residential minimum renewables and for electric vehicles. And I'll make the comment here, but I want to be explicitly clear that the note that's on the slide that talks about requiring 50% of renewables on homes, there are many and varied exceptions associated with this requirement. And so I want it to be, again, very clear that this code language does not definitively mandate 50% renewables on every single residential design. There are alternatives that are available. We'd love to see lots of renewables on homes, but there are other ways of achieving code compliance through the exceptions within this section. And then we've also provided clarification and some alignment at the national level regarding electric vehicle parking as associated with residential buildings as well. And again, here we're talking about residential in terms of single family, duplex, and townhome type developments. Finally, I want to note that even though I've been speaking for a few minutes on commercial and residential energy code provisions, these are just some of the highest level and most impactful items. There are many other edits in our energy codes that are very important to advancing Denver's goals and that are going to be relevant for many different kinds of projects, whether we're doing new residential or commercial construction ground up, or if we're doing alterations or additions to existing residential or commercial buildings. Moving on to discuss Denver Green Code. The Denver Green Code is essentially, though not entirely, a voluntary document. In 2019, the Denver Green Code was entirely voluntary, and the Denver Green Code addresses climate change, biodiversity through mitigation. It addresses climate change and biodiversity loss through mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency. As I noted, it was entirely voluntary in 2019. And in 2022 or in 2023, as we adopt this and move forward, there will be limited mandatory provisions that are associated with Denver Green Code for commercial and multifamily buildings. So as I move forward in the conversation here just a moment, I want to be clear that the limited mandatory use is not applicable to single family or duplex or IRC townhome type buildings. And there will be criteria I'll talk about in a moment related to large additions or alterations to commercial buildings as well. The intent of the Denver Green Code is to provide guidance for what we would call greener buildings of the future, more energy efficiency, better resource conservation, sustainability, as that applies to many different areas, better materials, indoor air quality, water, things that look at site land use and building performance. The best way to think about the Green Code is, I describe it as an incubator for mandatory code language of the future, so that for many projects, the Denver Green Code will remain voluntary. It is an opportunity for design teams to see what is likely coming in terms of mandatory criteria in future code cycles. Speaking just a little bit further on the Denver Green Code and the limited mandatory use. Again, this is going to be applicable for new commercial projects and major renovations. A major renovation is defined as one that's got more than a 50% addition or modification to the building, or if it's got an addition or a modification of 100,000 square feet or more, whichever is less. And the idea there is that if we were doing major building, alterations, change of occupancy throughout, that sort of thing, that the criteria for limited mandatory use would come into play. And again, if you have more specific questions, we'll definitely be happy to answer those in the breakout rooms here shortly. Finally, to acknowledge all of the additional work that went into Denver Green Code amendments. There are criteria around ecological impact statements, diversification for native and adapted low water and pollinator supportive landscaping, small site rainwater management, embodied carbon around concrete and steel for structural materials, energy efficiency, which we talked about in Energy Code and is talked about further in the Green Code, as well as things like deconstruction and reuse and composting and waste diversion. And finally, outcome-focused limits for resource use and indoor environmental quality thresholds. There's a lot in the Green Code, and we really want folks to read the document. It's a wonderful resource, and again, a really nice vision into the future. So I'm going to talk for just a moment about the timeline for transition and implementation. And following this, we will move into our breakout rooms in just a moment. So we are currently in the time frame of having the public drafts of all of our code documents posted on our website. I believe we'll get a post or a link posted here in the chat in just a moment. And anyone and everyone is welcome to visit that website, take a look at the proposed code amendments. And if you have questions or comments, they are what we would call live documents. And so you can add a comment or ask a question right there on the website. And we will be monitoring those. We will answer those questions if there are some, and we'll make code changes if necessary. And in particular, if we find any errors or omissions in the drafts that we currently have posted. The next steps in the code adoption and transition timeline will include going through the legislative process, which is through council committee and then through full council. That happens in December and early January. And then there will be a code transition period following the adoption of the code, which is by ordinance, through City Council in early to mid-January 2023. That code transition timeframe will end on May 1st, 2023. In the past, we had used a 4-month criteria for the transition period. We're no longer using 4 months because the date could vary by a few days, and that can be really challenging. So we're using the specific date of May 1st. And so there will be requirements for projects to be submitted by the end of the day on April 30th if they would like to comply with the current codes, which are the 2018-2019 series of amended codes. Anything submitted on or after May 1st will need to meet these new codes that we are speaking to, which is the 2021-2022 series of codes. We do have transition rules policy and transition language in our codes that addresses, in particular, very large projects that, quite frankly, cannot pivot over the period of that roughly 4-month transition period. And so we'll make sure that information is already on our website, but we can certainly add that to the chat via a link for the transition rules policy looking forward as well. With that being said, the next phase of the briefing is to shift into breakout rooms, and I'll provide some instruction on how to do that. At the beginning of the presentation, you'll recall that there are 4 breakout rooms plus the general kind of lobby area. The lobby is where we are all right now. So if you do not want to go into a particular breakout room, you're welcome to stay in this lobby area for general questions, and there will be a number of us here to answer those questions. For the breakout rooms, you will self-select your room. and you can go into or out of a breakout room at your leisure. Just be careful if and when you leave a breakout room that you leave the room, you don't leave the meeting. If you leave the meeting, you have to rejoin the entire Zoom meeting. So just be careful what button you're clicking there. For some breakout rooms, there will be a short presentation specific to those particular codes. It would be very brief, just a couple minutes. And then the breakout room session, the first one will last 15 minutes. We will then switch and we'll do another 15-minute session for folks that would like to go to a couple different breakout rooms during the next 30-minute time frame. And then following the breakout room sessions, folks will all come back to this general quote lobby area, and there will be time additionally following the breakout room sessions for additional questions or any questions that may not have been answered. If we don't have an opportunity to get to every single question or comment that comes up in the breakout rooms or in our general lobby area, we will be tracking those, and we will make sure to provide a response to those in an upcoming newsletter with likely an FAQ section associated with this particular briefing. So with that being said, I believe we are ready to make the breakout rooms live. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that you can select breakout rooms. Please go ahead and make those selections if you'd like to choose to move into those. We'll give it just a minute, and then anyone remaining here in the main lobby can ask those questions if they'd like as well. And then at 5:15, we will change breakout rooms and do another 15 minutes.
Eric, I'm having a problem. The join buttons on the breakout room selection don't seem to work. Oh, I just got a pop-up. There we go. Thank you.
All right. Very good. Okay, so for those folks that may be left in this kind of general main lobby area, if you do have questions that may not be specifically related to the codes that are listed there on the right side of the screen for which there are breakout rooms, feel free to raise your hand. I see that we also have some questions in chat, so I'm going to take a look through those as we're in this breakout room space, and we will spend the next 15 minutes talking through these.
I don't see a place to raise my hand, but I have a general question.
Yeah, Andre, go right ahead.
There was a note that in chapter 5, there's better alignment between DOTI goals for Vision Zero and the fire department. Can you elaborate on that? I couldn't find any specific examples.
Yeah, so that is going to be a question that you'll need to ask Tony Caro in our IFC breakout room.
IFC, got it.
Don't mind jumping over there. Tony
Yep.
will be able to answer that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, let's see. I know a number of folks have moved over to the breakout rooms, and at risk of answering questions for folks that have moved into a breakout room, I'll wait to answer some of the questions that were in the chat until we all reconvene around 5:30. So again, if there's anyone here in this kind of main lobby, feel free to just to speak up or raise your hand if you'd like. There's a raise hand option under the reactions button down at the bottom of your screen. Or remember that if you're just on your phone, you can *6 to speak up as well. Looks like Sam has a question here. Give me just a moment to read this. Let's see here. We're talking about supervisor certificates related to contractor licensing. And let's see here. Asking about for clarification regarding the criteria as part of the adoption. Yes, so what we are doing, Sam, in terms of particularly the B and B2 supervisor certificate and contractor licenses, which do have a threshold for those contractors with experience for essentially different scopes of work for those buildings under the general Class B. We are providing clarity not only in the amendments of our administrative provisions, but through our contractor licensing group here within CPD as well. And so it's imperative that we provide clear expectations, clear requirements, and that not only are they communicated, but that we can follow those and you can depend on those when you're looking to become licensed in Denver. So I hope that helps to answer your question. In terms of the publication of those, that will be forthcoming as the amendments are adopted in January. But we are absolutely aware of the improvements that are necessary and that are forthcoming there. Okay, I see it. There's a general question just regarding either certificates or regarding credit for attending this briefing. And if you didn't select the option during the registration process, then you can reach out to Amanda Weston on our comms team, and she can work to ensure that you get the credit for attending this presentation. Amanda's contact information is in the chat. It's also amanda.weston@denvergov.org. Here. Okay, any other general questions? Yeah, wow, you're here. Okay, excellent. I see that you did post your question in the chat, and I think you had actually emailed that to us ahead of time. So I'll risk answering the question regarding the submittal of documents around the transition timeframe for compliance with either the current codes, those 2018, 2019 codes, versus the new codes, the 2021, 2022 codes. And your question is about clarification for the submittal. And that is a critical threshold regarding the submittal for projects. So for those, all of those projects that come in through our system, through our Excel Citizen Access e-permits portal, as long as they are submitted, that means they're logged into our system by 11:59 on April 30th, 2023, then it is completely legitimate for those to be based on the 2018, 2019 codes. As soon as that clock tips over to May 1st, then they need to be based on the new 2021, 2022 codes. Now, we recognize that there will likely be a large volume of projects that we receive in those last few days of April, and therefore it is not the time or the date that the submittal is processed or accepted for review, because that truly could be a couple days later. As long as you have it submitted by 11:59 on April 30th, then you've met the criteria, you've met the threshold for submittal under the 2018, 2019 codes. So hopefully that helped answer your question, but I see your hand still up, so feel free to unmute and go ahead and jump in there, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's very helpful, Eric. I just wanted to just ask one more thing. I mean, I know they expire in the 180 days, but there's not a date that like we would have to have those picked up by, like a specific date that you've put into place as well either.
So the 180-day expiration does apply for project approvals And this can certainly get complicated very quickly. But let's say that you submit a project in April, it goes through review, and it is approved and ready for permit, right around the end of June 2023. If that permit is not obtained and work hasn't started by the end of 2023, which would be 180 days following the approval, then that application will expire and redesign would be required.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Let's see, it looks like we've got a couple questions here on contractor licensing. Let's see. This is one I don't think that I can answer at the moment. It has to do with HVAC licenses and regarding technicians, regarding thermostats. That's not information that I'm familiar with at the moment, but we'll certainly look into this. My thought is that I don't see a scenario where we would need, if I'm understanding this correctly, licensed technicians to replace residential thermostats. But again, don't quote me there. We'll dig into this, and we'll make sure that we get back to you in a response on that question. Looks like there was another one that came in about residential EV chargers, class 2. What's going to be the regulation for companies to do the installations? Again, I'm sorry, maybe you could clarify your question regarding EV chargers. In terms of installation, it will need to be a licensed electrical contractor. But I'm not sure if that's the question that you're asking. And if it's not, if you could maybe clarify your question there on the EV chargers.
Sure. So my question is, what's going to be the procedure for companies to do the installations with the change of the codes? It's going to be like a protocol or something specific to follow in Denver?
In terms of the certifications or the requirements for companies to do the install, I apologize. I didn't catch the very first couple words of your question. Could you maybe repeat that?
Sure. So, yeah. So my question is regard to companies going to residences and do installation of class 2 EV chargers.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something coming, a regulation or a protocol the companies will have to follow? I know the licensed electrician, of course, but is there something else?
Yes, in terms of the specific requirements for that EV charger source, yes, absolutely. In the IECC residential provisions, which, by the way, the draft is on our website if you'd like to dive into that. Following our conversation, there is specific language for residential and for commercial. They're in different provisions in terms of what is required. The conduit, the breaker size, or the space in the panel that's necessary for kind of future proofing if it's new construction, that sort of thing, as well as what's required to be EV ready, EV capable, or EV installed. So that language does exist, and it's in our IECC residential amendments. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Excellent, great. Thank you for clarifying. Don't see any additional questions in the chat right at this moment. If there's anyone here in this kind of main lobby space, feel free to unmute and ask any questions that you might have. Otherwise, we're going to give it about another minute and a half, and then we will switch breakout rooms for all occupants. And you can stay here, or you can go to a different breakout room if you'd like. And we would expect probably to have some other folks join us in this space as well. For anyone still in the main lobby that might happen to be following along in the chat, I just posted a couple of links. One was to the transition rules policy, which is mirrored in our administrative provisions in the code. And the other link is directly to the draft amendments for our codes. So you're welcome to visit those web links at your discretion. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do a switch of breakout rooms, or those that are in the main lobby. If you're in the lobby and you'd like to transition to another breakout room, please feel free to do so. We will be spending another 15 minutes with breakout rooms, so you can hop between a couple of them. And then we'll also be inviting additional questions here in this main lobby area as well. So if you'd like to switch, please go ahead and do so. And our presenters in the breakout rooms will start up again shortly.
Eric and Amanda, the IRC room has returned. So I'll go back to it, but just letting you know we've sent them back here.
Sounds good. Right. Looks like a number of folks are transitioning in and out of the different breakout rooms. I'm glad to see that. I hope it's valuable for anyone joining us here in the main virtual lobby area. If you weren't here in the previous 15 minutes, I invite any questions you may have that are general about the code adoption process. And you can certainly do so by unmuting and asking your question, or if you'd like to post it in the chat, feel free to do so as well. And I'll continue to monitor the chat and respond to questions as they come in. Robert, it appears that there's a question regarding projects going through the concept and SDP stage. And I'll actually go ahead and I'll probably take that question with respect to the transition rules and the May 1st
Got it.
deadline.
Okay.
So Patrick asked this question regarding working on our backlog, but also acknowledging that for those larger projects that go through what can be a long concept and SDP process, how that correlates with transition to the new codes. And the specific answer is that generally when we have projects that are large enough to go through concept and SDP, they are going to meet the threshold of what's called a major project under our transition rules policy. And there are allowances. We recognize that pivoting, a 10 or $20 million project or more, during that transition timeframe is not feasible. It's not even reasonable. And so there are pathways available to continue on the 2018-2019 codes for those major projects by simply submitting a request to me that I and my colleague in Denver Fire evaluate. Generally speaking, if you meet the list of criteria, you're going to get an approval. There are still timelines associated with submitting those major projects so that the design of those construction documents doesn't continue in perpetuity throughout 2023 and further. There are certainly thresholds, but that being said, we want to be reasonable, and we certainly don't want to cause projects undue duress, having to redesign if they don't miss or if they don't meet that April 30th, May 1st transition date. So I refer you to the transition rules there. Hopefully that helped, Patrick.
It did, yes. No, I did see the transition rules. So I think we'll meet all those criteria that you kind of laid out. Just, we're going through concept right now and just trying to, be aware of what the dates that are set forth in that transition period and how they impact the project. So I imagine we will be submitting a written request to you. So
sounds good. Yeah. And if you need more clarification, you can always reach out to me directly. My contact information will be at the end of the briefing presentation that we have here.
Excellent. Thank you.
Certainly. All right, there's a question generally related to clarifications and different team members. And as folks probably recognize, we are very busy, and therefore sometimes it's challenging to get an immediate response via phone or email. That being said, we have implemented a number of innovations this year and even very recently regarding the ability for anyone to call and speak to a real live human being. Now, whether or not they're going to be able to answer your question immediately is dependent on who's available at that time. But we do have pathways available through essentially new phone trees to get to the right people in a very reasonable amount of time. And to share that information, it's on our website, but the general number is 720-865-2700. That will definitely get you in the front door, and then we can route you appropriately to someone who can answer your questions. Or if they don't know the immediate answer, we can put you in touch with folks that do. So those are some new innovations that we've come up with. We certainly in no way, shape, or form intend to be unavailable. We try to be as reasonable with the time that we spend doing our plan reviews to move projects through the process, but also, being able to get on the phone, or answer an email. We want to be aware and respective of that as well. So hopefully that helps some. But again, I'll encourage you to use that direct phone number 720-865-2700. and you can get in touch with a non-robot person. It's good news for us. We're aware of it, and we're making improvements in that area. Okay, if there's anyone else here in the main lobby, feel free to unmute and speak up if you've got questions or comments, or you can put them in the chat if you'd like. As a reminder, if you happen to be just on your phone, you can *6 to unmute and ask a question if you've got it. There's a few more minutes left for folks that are in breakout rooms as they finish up some of the questions and conversations there. And then everyone will come back to this main lobby area, and we'll have an opportunity for additional general questions that may not have been asked yet, or folks who are in different breakout rooms and not here in the main lobby, an opportunity there as well.
Hello?
Hello, you're back.
Ah,
Okay, I am going to wait just a moment to give folks an opportunity to join us back here in the main presentation area. And then we will talk for just a minute about next steps, and we'll have additional time for Q&A as well. So I will give this maybe another 30 seconds or so that everyone can rejoin us. All right, we've got a pretty good contingent back here in the main briefing space. And so I will talk for a minute again about next steps in the code adoption process. This is a little bit of reiteration of what I talked about right before we went into the breakout rooms, but that's okay because as folks come back into the space, we want to make sure that they don't miss too much here. So again, with respect to where we're going in the next couple of months, we will take the draft code amendment language that's currently on the website, links for which were posted in the chat, and we will review and respond and edit as necessary our code amendment language for presentation to our City Council Committee, which is known as LUTI, the Land Use Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And in addition, then we will move on to full council submittal and approval in early January. There are two hearings in council, a first reading and then a second reading and a vote. And we look for that to occur hopefully around January 9th. And then it takes a few days for the legislation to get signed, which is when it becomes a legal document. And so that's probably going to be around January 12th. As I mentioned, there will be a transition date on May 1st. Something I had mentioned previously, and I want to provide a little clarification for the text that's on the bottom left portion of this slide. The provisions associated with the Energized Denver Existing Buildings Ordinance and the parity that Katrina spoke to regarding the permitting process comes into effect on March 1st. Now, the changes associated with that are changes in process, and we will be providing additional resources and training on how those changes affect projects that would have maybe historically gone through a quick permitting process that now need to be logged in for review due to the requirements for the energized Denver ordinance that was passed last year, actually. So again, just want to point out that there is a threshold on March 1st that's really going to apply just to those, essentially gas systems, where instead of just a quick permit swap out, there will likely be a plan review associated with that. So we'll make sure that there's additional information, and I know Kazer's doing an excellent job in providing communication in that area as well. And as Katrina mentioned, and the QR code that was on the screen previously will have lots of additional information in the resource hub and through presentations that they're giving associated with those energized Denver requirements. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next phase, which is just an open Q&A for everyone that's back here in this main lobby space. The breakout rooms are done. I hope that they were helpful for those of you that were able to join. If you did not get your question answered in the breakout room, you can certainly feel free to ask it now. You can post it in the chat. You can raise your hand and ask the question verbally. We've got about 25 minutes remaining today, and we're happy to use all of that time to help answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Feel free to raise your hand or post something in the chat if you would like. And I will awkwardly solicit questions or comments for a minute or two. But if we can, if we have crickets, then we'll call it a day. And that's all right. We want to make sure that we are resources available now if you need us. And if not, that's okay. So there we go. All right. Raymond put a question in there. Let's see here. We've got maybe Tony. I think you're on here somewhere, Tony Caro. We've got a question on amendments planned for NEC NFPA 70. Oh, sorry, actually, that's not Tony. This is the National Electric Code. Regarding NEC NFPA 70, the National Electric Code, the City and County of Denver follows the state of Colorado. The state adopts the NEC, and that will occur in, I want to say July. Dennis, jump in here if you know the specific date. I believe it's July 2023. And on the same date and time the state adopts the National Electric Code, which will be the 2023 NEC, the city will also adopt and enforce.
It's usually the first week of July.
It's usually July 1st. It was delayed to August the 1st during the pandemic, but the last code cycle, but this time it should be July the 1st. And I haven't heard otherwise.
Yep. So folks should plan on that, because with the NEC, there's no transition period in terms of projects that were designed based on the 2020 NEC versus the 2023 NEC. Once that date passes, it's a hard stop. So please plan accordingly. All right, see a few more questions coming in the chat here. Let's take a read. We do have a question here from Ryan regarding NFPA 13 and water curtains. Tony, if you can, I can read it, and then Tony, maybe you can potentially answer that. And if not, then we can always answer the question separately if we need to. The question is there any further clarity on the changes to water curtain revisions? Are they being removed outright, or are they being reverted back to NFPA 13 for guidance?
Yeah, okay, this is Tony with Fire Department. And Ryan, I believe you're probably referring to Building Code 7058, which allowed water curtain to increase opening percentages to 50% on fire separation distance. That provision, as Eric mentioned, has been removed. Now, we still do refer to water curtains in several other sections, including the vegetation section, and we will still design in accordance with NFPA 13.
Thank you, Tony. All right, we've got a question here regarding the transition on March 1st as related to the Energized Denver Existing Buildings Ordinance. And the question is, after March 1st, 2023, plan review will be required for all gas systems in a remodel when upgrading a system. So I would ask our partners in Kaiser or on our mechanical plumbing team to jump in to help answer that clearly so I don't flub it.
So I'll jump in. So currently, replacement of gas systems in existing buildings, if you're replacing with equipment that is like for like, so same capacity, same efficiency, etc., can be done as a quick permit without plan review. If you're remodeling a space and upgrading a system or changing the system, that would require a plan review today. March 1st, the change becomes those systems that are being replaced like for like gas no longer can be permitted as a quick permit. They will require a plan review. They won't necessarily require a set of construction documents if they're replacing like for like gas, but they'll be required to demonstrate compliance with 2 of the 3 compliance options, one being an electrification feasibility report, 2 being right sizing the equipment to make sure that it's sized appropriately for the space it's serving. And then number 3 would be the gas pressure testing the gas system serving that gas appliance, and that would go from the appliance all the way back to the meter. And so you'd be required to pick 2 of those 3 items and submit those for review.
Thank you, Chuck. We've got a question here regarding the feasibility worksheets that are referred to. Can our partners in Kaiser offer an update on the timing for those? I know they're being worked on currently. Can you offer an update on approximately when we'll be looking at those?
Yeah, the feasibility reports, electrification feasibility report template will be available shortly. Let me see if that page is live. If it's not ready, it will be later this week.
Oh, so it's imminent, Katrina, in terms of those pages. Okay, so we're talking days or maybe a week if we're not there. Excellent. Okay. Right, keeping an eye if there's any additional questions coming into the chat. I don't see anyone that looks like they've got their hand up at this point. If I've failed to recognize that, I apologize. If you do have your hand up and I'm just not seeing it, feel free to unmute and ask your question.
Hey, Eric Browning, this is Alicia Bach. I did not have my hand up, but I thought of a question. I'm curious if we're going to get some updated submittal guides and criteria to support these changes. I know that there's, limited information, especially on the residential side for that. And so I'm hoping that there's going to be like a set time and effort to make that happen. I don't think we fully got there with the last code adoption. So I'm hoping that with this one, we could, get those updated guides and things to help with the submittal criteria to support these code changes.
Yeah, absolutely. A great point, Alicia. So the submittal guide documents, the policies associated with language in the new codes will all be worked on over the next few months by city staff and supporting team members, so that as we go through, we start the transition and then we approach the timeframe for mandatory application of the 2022 amended codes. these resources are available. It's definitely a significant lift for city staff to make those updates. But yes, that will be forthcoming. We wanted to make sure that we have essentially approved or close to approved code language before we make those changes, so we don't have to do the same work twice. But yes, that absolutely will be forthcoming, and that'll all be shared on our websites and externally as well.
Thank you, Eric.
Okay. There are still nearly 200 folks on the call and no remaining questions. That means that the presentation was so amazing that no one has any questions. We will be posting this information on our website. We'll be sharing it via our DS newsletter. I would ask folks, if you haven't signed up, please do sign up for the DS newsletter. And we don't spam people. we don't sell any any emails or anything like that. We send generally one update a month, and every once in a while we'll have a special announcement. But that's it. So if you are not on the list, go ahead and sign up for that DS newsletter. Otherwise, I'll make
Eric, I jumped off mute real quick. I had a question just about implementation.
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
In the chat, but was wondering what is the duration of time between when the final code language is issued and the date at which new projects logging in have to be following that code? What is that duration?
That duration will be, right now it looks like about 3.5 months.
Great, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. All right, and I see that Christy responded to one of the questions that was raised in the Green Code breakout discussion, so that's in the chat, as well as Amanda has posted the link for our newsletter if you're not signed up there. So again, encourage folks to use that resource. In addition, if you have any other questions, please do check our website. Use our phone number. As I mentioned, we have real live people answering phones. And so that 720-865-2700 number will get you a person, and we can direct your call accordingly. I'll give it one more shot. Any other questions or comments? Right. Not seeing any. With that, I'd like to thank everyone that stuck around to the end, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all. We look forward to working with you in the future and helping all of your projects come to fruition over the weeks and months and years ahead. Thanks a lot. Have a great night.
Eric, I see someone actually has a question. Or they said wait one more. So.
Let's see. Tom, if you'd like to speak your question, feel free. I'm not sure if you're writing at the moment.
Sure. Yeah, sorry. I think in one of these last slides, you had mentioned there was a mention of large projects may receive some leeway for that. I forget which deadline it was, but what constitutes a large project, and what, how is that considered?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So in our transition rules policy that is posted, a link to that's posted in the chat, and it's also on our website. We have provisions for major projects that cannot easily pivot, in that, roughly 3.5-4 month transition period timeframe to the new codes. And so in the policy, there are directions in order, basically how to make a request to stay on the 2018-2019 codes. If you're already, approaching CDs, or you've got, an SDP that's close to approval early next year. In terms of the definition, large projects are those that have a total valuation of $10 million or more, and are not an IRC designed or compliant project. So if it's a single family, or if it's duplex, or even a townhome that's got a smaller valuation, then those do need to be updated during that transition timeframe. But if you're a large project, a major project, then you can follow the written request directions within that transition rules policy. And more likely than not, as long as you meet the criteria, then we'll approve that for continuation on the 1819 codes.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Eric, Robert, and everyone, thank you very much. It's really wonderful to have this kind of transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for everyone for participating. That's really what it's all about.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.